there's two main things that attracted me to ZOE. The first one was that I hadn't heard of them beforehand, which is unusual because a lot of people that work for ZOE had actually heard of ZOE before. But in my case, I hadn't heard of them, but what I was coincidentally familiar with was the concept of what ZOE does. I thought, so we've got the personalised nutrition. Someone that I'd worked with in a previous company knew a recruiter that was like partially engaged with ZOE. It wasn't a super strong relationship, but it was enough to sort of just have my name pop up in a call. Something that is very poignant to me is that it won't actually be obvious how it's affecting things, possibly for many, many years, because we kind of seen that with social media. And so much as we develop the technology, we seed it throughout society. Everyone is like, wow, this is an amazing thing. And while there are many, many positives, I think that we're only recently starting to think, okay, what other unintended impact may this invention actually be having?
If you could bring back one piece of tech that's either evolved as a tool or it's not in use anymore, it's just sort of since ceased to exist, what would it be and why?
Probably steam trains.
I wasn't expecting that.
I think that there's people have a nostalgia for the old style trains.
Welcome to this week's episode of Akoni Tech Talks. Joining us today, we have the head of IT at ZOE, Steven Kerr. Welcome, Steven.
Good to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
No, we're really excited to have you here. And like all episodes of Akoni Tech Talks, we start right at the beginning. So tell me, when did your interest in IT and tech first start?
Well, that's kind of two questions, because IT and tech are slightly different. I would say my interest in tech would probably have started when I was about 3. That's the earliest memory I have. And that was playing my dad's Amiga. I think it was the Amiga 500 that he had. And that was just playing games. Interest in IT, I would probably say, I guess I'm still working on that one to an extent. No, I mean, I would say that I'd worked in IT probably for about 2 years before I really felt, wow, there's value here. That I want to commit to longer term. That's not to say I didn't enjoy it, but when I first entered IT, I kind of fell into that, and obviously we'll get to that in a second, but it was an opportunity that I followed, and I enjoyed the job. It took me a while to understand that this was an environment that would actually be fulfilling for me in the long term. And as I say, that took a good couple of years to kind of come to that conclusion. At one point, I thought about switching from IT to software engineering because I did have enough of a background in that area to kind of go the kind of more typical software engineer route. But in the end, the opportunities that came up to me were in the IT sphere, and I really did start to develop an appreciation for what that was separate from software engineering or any of the other disciplines that you can have within tech.
Yeah, and you went to university as well. What did you study?
So I studied a program called informatics at the University of Edinburgh. I never finished that program, however. I am a uni dropout. So I entered that program. It was essentially computer science. They made this distinction between the computer science and informatics program by essentially the informatics program was longer. It was an undergraduate master's degree. I believe it still exists now. But I only stuck with that program for about 2 years. There was nothing wrong with it. But in the end, and I only worked this out later, I realized that the environment wasn't really for me. It wasn't the environment I was looking for. So I ended up going away into something completely different. I was working in EE at the time. It used to be called T-Mobile. So I was a phone salesperson, which was kind of techie. And then an opportunity came up to kind of move into a games company, and then I took things from there. And eventually I found my way back to my IT roots professionally, because I did have the academic interest. it just didn't work out for me at the time.
Yeah.
So I got back to IT eventually.
Mm-hmm. And university's always been kind of viewed as one of those traditional routes into certain fields, but specifically when it comes to tech, do you think that's still the right way to go, or there are so many more opportunities now?
It's hard to say across the board whether it's the right way to go. I don't think it's the only way to go.
Yeah.
And I think that not enough people at that point in their life are aware of that. To kind of really, in my own experience, one of the biggest regrets I ever had was not knowing to look around when I was about 16 or 17 at what other pathways did exist.
Yeah.
And I can remember at the time, it was around the time that I dropped out of uni. I was maybe about 20 at the time. And I found an apprenticeship program. It was with IBM up in Edinburgh.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, that's cool. But it was for school leavers.
Yeah.
So I didn't qualify anymore. And I always thought, I wonder if that would have been a better route for me to take. I do think that uni it's the traditional pathway for a reason. It's reliable. But my advice would be that if you're going to take the uni pathway, do your best to look ahead and find grad opportunities that you're actively going to work towards. Don't make it one, don't make it two. Try and identify the companies that are offering these placements, because the university won't necessarily do it for you.
Yes.
And ultimately that is what you want to be working towards. Then you can kind of frame within yourself why you're there. And if you feel that the academic pathway isn't for you, then I do think that you should do much of the same thing. Have a look around. Lots of big companies do have apprentice programs. It's a completely valid route. It does depend. There's a bit of nuance, I would say, to the specific discipline that you're interested in. You might not know what you're interested in. You might be generally into tech. You might not be so sure. But it can vary quite a lot in terms of what employers actually look for. I made the distinction just there about IT, software engineering. If I'm looking to hire someone in IT in my team, I'm looking for technical aptitude, yes.
Yeah.
But I'm also looking for things like customer voice and the ability to kind of like speak to people in a way that is engaging, that's reassuring, because if you start off in IT, you're probably going to be doing technical support of some description.
Yeah.
You're probably not going to be in the server room working on all the stuff that could go wrong. So that's very important. But if you're doing software engineering, then that you still need those communication skills, but you're not working necessarily with customers, you're working with peers and colleagues.
Yeah.
It's a different skill set. AI, that is a whole other beast, I think. I'm not sure I certainly don't have a bird's eye view on what the pathway should be for AI, but most of the people that I've worked with in the AI capacity do generally have an academic background. They've usually got some kind of machine learning or computer science and AI degree. At the moment anyway, it seems to me that that field hasn't yet been abstracted enough to the point that the underlying academic understanding is no longer required.
Yeah.
Whereas obviously back in the day, if you look at how software engineering started, well, all software engineers originally were hardware engineers because you were working at a very low level with the systems of the time.
Yeah.
We abstracted that with all of the programming languages that have come down the pipe, and it gets increasingly abstract. Nowadays, you don't even really need to know how to code in order to code, but that also doesn't make you an engineer. So it's a complicated answer, because I think that it's a very broad question, and I think that the most valuable thing that anyone in that position can do is spend some time thinking about where it is that they want to go.
Yeah.
And it doesn't need to be overly specific. It doesn't need to be, I want to do this job in this company, because you probably don't know what jobs actually exist in practice, and it's hard to get a sense of that from the outside.
Yeah.
So you want to follow what really resonates with you. What makes you excited? What do you spend time doing when no one asks you to do it? Are you sitting and creating a GitHub portfolio organically without being asked to do so? Right, well, that's telling you something about yourself. It's telling you what you enjoy doing, that you would essentially do for free, and there's nothing better than being able to do something that you would do for free but getting paid to do it.
And so I feel like that's a nice segue into your time at Rockstar Games when you landed your first role. Tell us about that. How was that sort of natural progression after university into that role?
Well, that was a bit of a segue as well. So as I said, I was working in phones sales, and the opportunity came up for a QA position at Rockstar North in Edinburgh. So I went for that because I was a big gamer throughout my childhood. Obviously, I knew Rockstar, I knew what they did, I was enthusiastic. At the time, I think it was Grand Theft Auto 5 had just came out. So I had played that to death, and I was able to go in and essentially breeze the interview because I was just so enthusiastic about the game, and so I got that job. However, I then was only in the QA department for 3 months, and then an internal opportunity came up within the IT team. I hadn't really thought about what my pathway was at this point. I just knew that from going from phones into QA in a games company, that felt more right to me. So I thought, well, I'm going to go for that. And then the same thing happened with the internal vacancy. That came up, and I thought, that feels right to me. That's something that I can see myself doing, that I would like to do.
Yeah.
So I basically went full hog to kind of make myself known within the team. I was very, very new, obviously. There were some people that had been there for a long time that were also interested. But ultimately, I was able to pull, to a large extent, from the academic background. You know, even though I didn't complete my degree, I did actually have a lot of things that were relevant. You know, I had an understanding outside of how to build a computer. I did also know how to use programming languages and kind of the basics of computer science, and that helped. But I would say the biggest thing was that when I saw that opportunity, I really put everything that I had into making it mine.
Yeah.
And that's a piece of advice that I would give to people in general. There will be opportunities if you're looking at the job market. There will be lots of opportunities that you think, yeah, I could do that job, sure. But every now and then one will come along that you think, oh, I'm really excited about that.
Yeah.
And you've kind of got two choices at that point. You can approach that opportunity in the same way that you would all the other jobs. And that's kind of hedging your bets, because you might get it, but you probably won't. The alternative is to go full pelt and do everything you can to recreate the CV specifically for that job, or write a cover letter, even though that's a nuisance and a lot of people won't do it, or see if you can get an inroads, find someone's email and send them an, you know, hey, I've applied for the job. The risk with that is that you won't get all those opportunities either. And when you don't, it hurts a lot more. Yeah. Because you've put all that effort in and you've built up this dream of you getting that opportunity. And when it doesn't happen, it hurts. So, but my conclusion has been throughout my own career that you have to develop a resilience over time to dealing with that pain when you don't get those roles. Yeah. Because it is the only genuine way to actually finally get it in the end, because it's so competitive out there and there's so many hurdles in the way, and it's not all just about whether you've got the job requirements ticked off or not. There's unknown factors such as, oh, someone clicked too fast and your CV was skipped. Yeah. These days you have AI automation when it comes to CVs, and it might be that you've not put the right words in there, and then that gets filtered out, even though you would be a perfect fit. So these are all factors that you need to do everything you can to be seen, to work hard, but don't do it for every opportunity. Do it for the ones that really call out to you, and develop a resilience to moving on. And I see that, and I'm saying that purely from observation of my own journey, because that's exactly what's happened for me in every opportunity. And obviously on my own CV, you see the ones where I hit the mark and it worked out. But you don't see the 20x pool of other applications where I did the same thing and that didn't work out. There's a lot of dead and buried dreams that are kind of hidden in there that you can't see. But I think that is the only kind of real approach that I've found that really bears fruit in the long term.
Yeah, and before we come on to obviously talking about your time at ZOE now, what happened after Rockstar Games? What was next for you?
So I was at Rockstar for only 2 years, but it was a very intense 2 years because Rockstar was a very, very old company, older than a lot of people think. Actually had its start it was 82 or 83 under a totally different name. And then it became Rockstar about the year 2000 or so. So they had an established office culture. They had a lot of people, they had a lot of infrastructure on the IT side. Some of it was brand spanking new, stuff that had just been put in. Some of it was really old because it had been there since the 90s. So it was a whirlwind of learning. I can remember starting as the junior IT support and essentially being taken into the server room and thinking, what am I looking at? I can remember asking the guy on my team, how is it that the people out in their desk get internet if there isn't a cable going into the router sort of thing, and he's like, well, you patch it in here. And I'm like, what do you mean, So these were just totally foreign concepts, but I was open to the experience, and I approached it with a degree of humility to sort of, be prepared to be the fool, in other words, because if you're not, then you're not going to learn properly, After 2 years at Rockstar, I decided that I'm not sure whether I want to keep working within IT, not because of anything to do with Rockstar, but just because I felt I don't know where this is going. So I actually took a bit of time out, and my intent at that point in time was to go into software engineering. I studied for a Java qualification just to kind of get that tick box. I got that, and then right about the time that I passed the exam, an opportunity came up in another games company in Edinburgh. This time, not an established company, very, very new. It was a startup. So I joined that company. I think I was the fourth or fifth person to actually join them. Obviously, the rest were not IT. So I was pretty much responsible for the IT of this company that had just started. We were in a church basement at the time with, AstroTurf on the floor. It was a bit surreal. I thought, what have I got myself into here? But then we moved very quickly. We moved into offices. The company grew, and I entered as the IT support tech. I didn't enter as a senior figure. I entered as, hey, currently we've got the CTOs building PCs for people. We don't want that. It makes sense. Let's start our IT team. So I started that IT team, and then I was with that company for 5 years. They grew rapidly over those 5 years, so it was about 100x staff from when I joined, 4 to 400, over multiple offices in Edinburgh, but also with office locations in Hungary, elsewhere in the world, some remote, not quite offices, but still a presence, even in as far as China to the West Coast US. So I really developed a lot of my kind of baseline IT leadership approach in that company. I learned a lot of lessons there. It was a intense 5 years. I learned good lessons, bad lessons. I would say, and this is a bit of a rule of thumb, I think, because I've noticed this in myself, you learn a lot when you start a job and when you're there. But a lot of the things you learn, you often don't realize until you've actually moved somewhere else. And it's when you come up against the same problem that you dealt with previously that you realize, oh, the last time this happened, I did X, Y, or Z, so maybe this time I'll do something different. And that was definitely the case. But that was a very intense 5 years because there were lots of moving parts. It was an unusual situation because there were two options. It was either I grow with the company or I could do my job well but not necessarily grow. And there wouldn't be anything necessarily wrong with that. But I decided to try and keep pace with them, and that was where I ended up eventually becoming the head of IT after a few years, because the company at that point was big enough, and I had established a team, started to build that up, and then that's where I moved into my first proper management role. But it was still very much a kind of half hands-on, half people leadership role as well. It was never sort of, hands-off manager, and to this day I've still not really been in that position. I'm not sure I'd want to be, but maybe in the right environment.
And so fast forward now to your time at ZOE as head of IT. What was it that attracted you to that role, and how did it come about?
So there's two main things that attracted me to ZOE. The first one was that I hadn't heard of them beforehand, which is unusual because a lot of people that work for ZOE had actually heard of ZOE before. But in my case, I hadn't heard of them. But what I was coincidentally familiar with was the concept of what ZOE does. I thought, so we've got the personalized nutrition. I had just enough understanding of that particular area to get it. And that helped. That helped when I was going through the interview process, because I was speaking a similar language. I was able to speak on their level. The other thing was the environment and the opportunity. It was exactly what I was looking for at that point in time, because I had done, in between ZOE and the games company that I just mentioned, there were about 2 other startup companies that I worked for. And in those cases, it was first person in, building up the team. And I got a lot from that. I'm glad I did it, because I learned so much. It really did kind of like seed who I am professionally today. But I was looking for something that was a little bit further along this time, because I felt that had more value for me. And ZOE had an existing IT team that had been doing their thing for about 3 years. ZOE obviously had an established brand, it had an established customer base. It wasn't a super at-risk early stage startup. Obviously there's a lot that can still go wrong. always the case. You can never rest on your laurels. But at the same time, it was just the right fit from that point of view for me, and I thought, I have to go for this. And I applied the exact same approach that I did back when I went from QA to IT in Rockstar, which was I did absolutely everything that I could to get in front of the right people. And I mentioned earlier how there's unknown factors. Absolutely the case for ZOE. I believe I submitted my initial application about 24 hours after the job ad came up, because I was scouring the market at this point, trying to find opportunities. And I didn't hear anything for 2 weeks. And I thought, no, that's not right. Like, if they'd seen my experience, I feel it's such a good fit. I'm like, I'm going to get these people to talk to me. I ended up checking my contact list, worked out that someone that I'd worked with in a previous company knew a recruiter that was like partially engaged with ZOE. It wasn't a super strong relationship, but it was enough to sort of just have my name pop up in a call. And then the internal recruiter checked my application, and then I got an invite after about 15 minutes after that conversation took place. But the point was that there is a lot of things that can get in the way, and it's not great, it's not ideal. There are reasons for it. It's not all just bad. There are reasons, but if you're, and I've seen this myself when I've hired before, that I think at one point I was hiring for a role in Dubai. We got something like 1,000 applications in about 48 hours. And in that case, we didn't have any automation baked into that. So I actually was like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to give everyone a fair shot. And I went through all 1,000 applications. But there's so much that can go wrong. There's so much can go wrong, and it can be nothing to do with you. I think that's important to remember when you're trying to penetrate the job market, is that it's very unlikely that it's personal. And you certainly should never take it personally, because the people that you're trying to be seen by are probably reviewing many applications. Even if you're just a couple of days past the point they've started to kind of select people, it might be that they don't go back and check the list afterwards, so maybe you would be a good fit. It's not always a perfect system. But that's essentially how I got started with ZOE.
How did you feel when you found out you got the job?
Oh, I was overwhelmed. It was such a relief. It was also intimidating because I'd worked for. I don't think I've worked for any company that has such a strong internal ecosystem that really does seed throughout the whole organization. So I mean a few things by that. So first of all, the caliber of talent is very high.
Yeah.
But people are also exceptionally motivated. And that can be intimidating because what you're doing when you're starting a new role is, in that kind of environment, you're essentially trying to jump onto a train that's going at 100 miles per hour and then keep pace with what's already happening. There's a momentum and you're trying to find your place within that. And yeah, you'll have your roles and your responsibilities, so you're not completely lost out in the wilderness, but working out how to actually integrate with your peers and make things happen is difficult. And that was intimidating, but also I knew that this was a good thing and that it would force me to grow, that it would force me to keep up and keep pace. And I was prepared to do that. I was prepared to kind of do my best to keep up and keep pace. And within a very short period of time, I thought, yeah, I can already feel myself expanding beyond where I was previously, in a very positive way.
And as you say, ZOE's already, well established, but you'll be growing at the same time with it as well. It's getting bigger and bigger. But for people who aren't that familiar with ZOE, can you explain a bit about how it works? So
ZOE has, their main goal is to improve the health outcomes of millions of people. At the moment, predominantly through personalised nutrition. Now, what that means in practice is ZOE has 3 products at the moment. The one that most people will be familiar with because it's in all of the ads is the gut microbiome blood test and blood sugar test that they do. And then that feeds into an application that will essentially score foods based on your own biology to tell you or make suggestions for the kind of foods that you could eat in order to improve your health outcomes. So that could translate to, hey, maybe tomatoes are great for you, but not so great for me, things like that. And the app that ZOE has is designed to help you in that journey as much as possible. So it will make suggestions as to the kind of foods you could be eating, but it will also make suggestions to the kind of meals that you could actually be preparing. And there's an increasing amount of flexibility being added into that. It's a fairly developed product as it stands, but some of the stuff that they're working on right now, there's so many directions in which ZOE could go to really expand it and make that value proposition greater and greater. The other 2 products that are currently on shelves actually is the Gut Shot. So that was via a partnership with Marks & Spencer's, which was, if you went into an M&S recently, certainly when it first launched at the start of the year, it was yellow absolutely everywhere. So the Gut Shot is, it's kind of in the name, essentially very high value, healthy probiotic for your gut. And we've also very recently launched a supplement product called Daily 30, and that's via Waitrose as well. So these are on shelves, and as I say, they all come together with the aim of enhancing health outcomes, delivering personal nutrition advice to as broad a demographic as possible.
And ZOE's actually evolved from COVID, hasn't it? It did start out during COVID-19.
Technically, no. So they made waves during COVID, but ZOE actually started a few years before. It was going for about 2 or 3 years beforehand. But what happened during COVID is that they saw an opportunity to contribute to the analysis of the spread of COVID at the time. There was a lot of things that went into making that possible and positioning ZOE as the company that actually did that. So what ZOE did was they created an app, the NHS, it wasn't the NHS, the COVID symptom study. And that allowed people to self-report symptoms during COVID, and they then applied partly the internal culture within ZOE, but also they have a relationship with King's College London, so there's an academic component to the company which feeds in as well, a strong partnership, and that enabled them to actually gather and analyse the spread of COVID throughout the UK in a way that no one else did at the time. So I believe ZOE was one of the first, if not the first people or organisations to identify the relationship between COVID and loss of smell, things like that. Eventually it became a source of reporting for the government, and that app actually fed into government data to predict spread of things. But as I say, that was an internal pivot. That was a, hey, we think we could make this happen. And then a kind of crack team came together internally to make it happen, I believe, over the span of a weekend.
Wow.
The kind of basic app, obviously it improved, but the basic app over the span of a weekend, which was interesting effort, monumental achievement. And that did drive awareness of ZOE. Unrelated to their core product, because they were already working on that for a few years prior.
I find the ZOE product itself so interesting, just the fact that now with where we are and the way things have progressed, we can take our sort of self-care and health into our own hands and look after ourselves in that way.
I feel that it's the inevitable direction that things will go. As I said, I had a kind of awareness about the gut microbiome, and I thought, even before hearing about ZOE, I thought it makes sense that at some point in the future, if we're able to understand that in greater depth, we'll be able to map things like the gut bacteria for individual people, and then target things like nutrition, but even things like pharmaceuticals as well. You know, but my impression at the time was that the financials weren't there yet, that the economics didn't make sense, because obviously to commercialize something like that is kind of difficult. It's not cheap. That technology is very cutting edge, but I think that ZOE has managed to do it. We're not the only one in the world, but like in the UK, certainly ZOE are leading the way, and it's not just about having a strong internal team. That's obviously a requirement, but there are other aspects to ZOE that really turns it into more of an ecosystem. So we have the academic relationship. ZOE has a very strong social media presence. There's a kind of dynamic that occurs there that I think has really contributed to ZOE's growth and success over the course of time, is that they aren't putting all their eggs in one basket, and they're able to do things that other companies couldn't by virtue of that relationship. They have access to data sets from the university, and so on and so forth. So there's lots of things that go into making it possible, but that's also what makes it so exciting, because they are essentially going into uncharted territory, and I guess I'm on that train as well.
And so what does your day-to-day look like for you?
Hard to describe, because it's never exactly the same. So at the moment, the team is very small within IT. ZOE is not an early stage startup, but still very much sort of scale up, still in the middle of its kind of growth period, so to speak. So that means that I have broad responsibility across the entire IT stack. Obviously, you would expect that from a head of IT, but in practice, what that means is that I don't just have responsibility for things, I'm often the person that might be doing the thing as well. Certainly I have to have technical awareness of everything that's going on, and that can span across a whole bunch of different fields. So technical support is probably one big pillar. Like any other business, we need to make sure that we can provide tech support to people that need it. That's complicated by the fact that ZOE is fully remote. And also geographically distributed, so we can never be in front of somebody actually helping them, so that makes things more tricky. I would say that the two other pillars are business as usual, so anything that any other team needs our help with, or anything that we know will come up on a predictable basis, whether that be we've got an application that needs to be renewed, I would lead the effort for that. We've got finance teams doing an audit, they need our help, I would deal with that as well. And then the third major pillar would be proactive improvements.
Yes.
You know, what is it that as a team we want to introduce to the business? What do we want to build or change that will kind of make things more efficient, make things more enjoyable and secure for all of the people that work there? So those are the three major pillars, and the specifics of that vary widely. A lot of it is communication, but then there is also the hands-on engineering as well, which I'm still very much actively involved in.
Yeah. I'd love to know what your favourite aspect of your role is.
The most positive feeling I get is from feeling like I'm doing the right thing at the right time.
Yeah.
And that's a tricky thing to manage when you have such a broad set of responsibilities. And this is something I come up against very often, is prioritization deadlines, essentially, where it can be difficult sometimes to work out, someone has a laptop which isn't working, should I help them with that? Or can they wait 2 or 3 hours while we do something else instead, which may benefit the whole business? So you have these deadlocks that happen quite a lot. So for me, the more that I've developed approach to my work that helps segregate and compartmentalize my focus and really drive focus, the better I feel, because then I know that not just that I'm working hard and that I'm doing my best, but also that I'm making a conscious effort to really address the areas that are going to have the greatest impact on ZOE at large. And there's a sense of fulfillment that comes from that. There's a sense of ownership that comes from that, that I don't think that you get. You could work hard and you could, not stop from the moment you start in the morning. But you're not always going to walk away feeling like you've actually done things that day. And that's where, and I don't think a lot of people are taught how to do this. Certainly I've had to kind of work it out as I went along. But the more that I've developed an approach which narrows my focus on the things that are most important, the more that I feel not just, yes, I've worked hard today, but I also feel a genuine sense of fulfillment, and I was happy to do the work, and I can walk away and say, hey, not everything's done, but I've done a good job today and I've actually had an impact. Because you can't always clear your desk. It's not possible.
No, I think that's a great piece of advice as well for people sort of wanting to move into any field, really, about having a healthy balance. So
yeah, and it's difficult because, as I say, you're not taught how to do this in many organizations. Certainly I wasn't. It may be straightforward. You might have a job where it's fairly obvious what you should do next. You've maybe got one process that you're kind of going through. So if you're on a help desk, for example, a lot of your decision making is already legislated for. You've got priorities, you know that you start with the high priority, then you work your way down. But I think it's inevitable that at some point in your career, regardless of where you start, you're going to end up in a job where there's a little bit more scope, a little bit more autonomy, and it's entirely possible that no one's going to tell you how to deal with that. They're just going to expect results. It's not ideal, but it is the reality. And I think that having a developed approach, or at least the awareness that you should develop an approach to actually discern what is valuable at any point in time, is very important to do. But it's context specific, learn to say no is a huge piece of advice.
Absolutely.
Or if not no, then at least, sure, I can do that, but I can't do this. What do you want? That's a good way to deal with that as well.
Definitely. We move on now to trending in tech. So it's come up in the news. Rachel Reeves, the UK Chancellor of the Exchequer, has been making cost-cutting announcements ahead of a crunch October budget to deal with what she says is a black hole in the country's finances. So she's announced that the Tories' 1.3 billion investment plans for AI will not be going ahead. So this was made up of an £800 million new supercomputer based at the University of Edinburgh. It was going to be used for AI research and would have been the first sort of supercomputer in the UK of its kind. it sort of prompted a lot of questions around how the UK seems to sort of always be lagging in terms of digital infrastructure anyway, compared to the likes of the US and China and the EU. It's saying this sort of supercomputer could have facilitated breakthroughs for the future, but I'm keen to know what your thoughts are on the UK potentially missing out on the coming AI boom. And do you think the cuts to the investment are a mistake?
It's, I think it's a complicated question because the main issue is no one person has a bird's eye view of the big picture. On the surface, not investing in AI is, if that's all the question was, is it good to invest in AI or is it not good? Then I would say that it's good.
Yes.
And not investing in it is a bad thing.
Yeah.
But I think that the political machinery that contribute to a decision like this, it's very difficult to discern that unless you're very familiar with the details. I would say that the way that I would assess the UK at large in terms of the AI industry is to not overly focus on government spending on supercomputers. Because I think, well, I don't think, because we're seeing this right now, that the majority of the innovation and breakthroughs that are coming from the AI side are actually happening within the private sector.
Yeah.
Now, the government has a role to play there, certainly equipping universities with what they need in order to actually drive the underlying research. That is definitely a thing.
Yeah.
The other thing is also making sure that an attractive environment exists for the private sector to actually exist within the UK in the first place. Now, the UK has a pretty good track record, all things considered, especially London when it comes to AI. Obviously, DeepMind was a London-based company that they essentially established Google's AI division when they were acquired. But I think that nothing is for certain in the world. I mean, we've even seen an exodus from Silicon Valley over the past few years. There's a lot of people moving into, say, Texas. Like, at the end of the day, the private sector will go to the places that make most sense for them to thrive in a competitive environment. With regards to the supercomputer, it's hard to say. I don't think that if you look at the AI that we're seeing right now, and I mean the big players, we've got OpenAI, Gemini, and probably Grok are probably the main three, and then you have a bunch of kind of other people that are either doing the same thing or slightly different things. But those three big players, none of those large language model AIs are being developed off the back of investment in a university. And the reason for that is that it's infeasible to do so. To train these AI models, you're essentially building some of the I think Grok 2, which has just came out from XAI, it took one of the biggest computing infrastructures ever to train that model. I think it was something like 20,000 NVIDIA GPUs. Grok 3, which is apparently due out next year, is going to have 100,000. It's 5x. It'll be the biggest supercomputer ever. These things are really expensive, and they're not getting built by the government. And that's not the government's fault. It's just a reality. And there has to be a commercial element that drives the development of this. If you look at any of the AI companies, they all have outside commercialization which allows them to actually build these systems in the first place. Because to a large extent, having a big supercomputer, yes, that is actually kind of how you build these AI that we're seeing right now. But it's not as simple as the government should be doing that. The government should be spending that money. I believe they said on that particular thing that it didn't make strategic sense. But then they also mentioned about, I think there's £100 million being committed to quantum computing research at the same time in 5 other locations in the UK. So it's kind of tricky because you think, well, there is a limited pool of resources and the bets have to be placed somewhere. It's easy to criticise the new government and say, oh, well, that's a bad call. But then it was committed by a previous government, which is no longer here. That's where I would look at the private sector and instead use that as a basis of judgment of whether the UK is actually creating the conditions that are necessary for innovation. That's a much easier signal to tap into. Are AI startups actually starting in the UK? Are any of them exiting? Are they actually building companies that aren't just a flash in the pan, that are sustainable, that actually like commercialize and put something back out there that people actually use? I mean, people are increasingly using large language models as a core part of their business. You can already see that across the kind of SaaS space. Like every SaaS vendor at the moment is adding AI in there. Usually as a very expensive add-on. But the point is that that commercial factor is necessary, because otherwise none of this would happen. But the baseline research, the underlying work on the academic side that's happening within universities, like that's very much important. But I just don't think you can boil it down to as simple a statement as, no, they definitely should have invested in a supercomputer. Maybe they should have, but certainly I don't know, and I'm not sure that there's many people that would be able to make an accurate judgment call on that.
And I think it's definitely just to watch this space when it comes to AI as well, in terms of how we're moving forward. Particularly, I know we've spoken about it in so many episodes as well, this sort of, there seems to be a bit of a fear that it's going to overtake jobs and replace people, and yes, there probably will be some roles that will be replaced, but I think it's about how we innovate and use AI as well to our advantage.
It is. It's I don't think anyone can really foresee the direction in which it's going to go in the long term. I mean, not with certainty. I mean, there's obviously people that say it's definitely going to kill us all. In the final estimation, we're going to have a Terminator-esque future on the horizon. I've heard compelling arguments from a pure probability standpoint that it will definitely happen with a long enough span of time. I think that the only thing we can say for sure is that it's going to make big waves. Something that is very poignant to me is that it won't actually be obvious how it's affecting things, possibly for many, many years, because we kind of seen that with social media. In so much as we develop the technology, we seed it throughout society, everyone is like, wow, this is an amazing thing. And while there are many, many positives, I think that we're only recently starting to think, okay, what other unintended impact may this invention actually be having? Personally, then at a societal level as well. And I think AI will be similar. There will be obvious impacts, such as we have automated this, we don't need to employ people to do this anymore. But that has been the technological trend pretty much since the Industrial Revolution, is that people do adapt, at least at a population level. And that's not to write off the genuine tragedy and hardship that people go through, because there will be some people that have been doing a job for perhaps a long time, and they will probably find it, or could find it, difficult to reskill to something else. And that will definitely happen. There's no doubt about it. I don't think that anyone that says that won't happen they're not thinking about it correctly, because it will happen. But how widespread it is, I'm not sure it will be I don't think it will cause societal collapse personally.
No.
I think that we have a track record of adapting. I mean, we adapted to the internet.
Yes.
We adapted to still adapting to social media.
Yeah.
But we adapted to the internet, and you have to bear in mind that, I mean, if you were born in the 90s, then you can probably still remember a time when there wasn't any internet. And then you look at, it's only been 20 years or so, and you see how the world's changed. It's ridiculous. So these things, they can come out of nowhere, which is why I don't think anyone can actually predict exactly where it's going to go. You can make bets on specific industries, and you could think, okay, if I was a company doing X or Y, and then I brought AI on the scene, that would allow me to do this other cool thing. So you can kind of narrow in on it at that particular level, if you're being granular, but when you're looking at the whole picture, it's anybody's guess.
I think it will hopefully present like exciting opportunities as well though, because when I think back to when I was at school too, you certainly didn't grow up and go, I want to be a social media manager. That wasn't a thing.
No, absolutely. Everybody wants to be on YouTube or whatever. It will, and I think that's actually the other side of, we can't predict how it's going to affect society in a bad way, but to be honest, we also probably can't predict how it's going to affect society in a good way either. Because one of the trends that we've seen over time, one of the basic reasons that there's so much money in tech and in tech companies is because what tech companies fundamentally are doing at a very kind of core level is scaling things. They're enabling things to happen at scale through the use of technology. And that's why, in companies like Google, for example, I don't know what it's like nowadays, but back in the day, if you were starting at Google, fresh out of university, in Mountain View campus, then you could be on $200,000 a year, $300,000 a year. And you think, well, that's absolutely insane. How is that possible? And it's because the work that those people are doing and the tools that they're connected with enable them to have impact at scale. And that's not necessarily, you can argue the merits of that, obviously, because that does mean that there are other jobs that people do that are equally as valuable, perhaps more valuable in many respects, that don't scale. And they don't receive the same benefits from that as a result of that. But whether it's right or wrong, and the kind of ethics of it is a very separate conversation. That is what's playing out. And with AI, I think that we can see that scale grow even more. And I mean, we've seen that within IT teams. I mean, my team at the moment, as I say, compared to the company, it's very small. We support a lot of people with not an awful lot of people. In the past, if you even go back to the noughties, if we were, as I said, we're a fully remote company, if we were on premise in an office and we had all of our servers in the office, then we would need a lot more people to run that operation. And I've worked in those environments, and we did. Whereas nowadays, you can have people that are running 10,000 servers and it's one person, That would be like having a data center to yourself that was just yours. So AI takes that even further, I think. It's not just an increment. I think it has the potential to be a quantum leap, because even in ways that aren't intuitive, such as we're seeing the ability for voice synthesis, so we can now translate YouTube videos, for example, to other languages. It modifies the lips so that the lips sync. It even uses the same voice patterns and intonation as the speaker, but they're now, instead of speaking English, they're speaking French, or, it's not infeasible. In fact, I think within our lifetimes that you could run a IT team and you could have someone that doesn't even speak your language on your team, and you can sit and have a conversation with them. You could be on Zoom or Skype or whatever, and you'll just sit and talk to them in English, but they'll hear it in Chinese or some other language, It's
incredible.
That kind of talent pool, unlocking that through AI, that's a whole other thing. But it's just one of many potential positive impacts that it could have.
Okay, we come on to the last part of the podcast. So this is the This or That Tech Talks quickfire round. iPhone or Samsung?
Samsung.
And Spotify or Apple?
Spotify.
Netflix or cinema?
Cinema.
Laptops or tablets?
Laptop.
ChatGPT or virtual reality?
Ooh. ChatGPT. I think staying grounded is important, and we've already got enough things distracting us from the real world. As much as I'm a technologist,
And video call or voice notes?
Ooh, that's a difficult one. I would probably say video call. Video call.
And finally, if you could bring back one piece of tech that's either evolved as a tool, or it's not in use anymore, it's just sort of since ceased to exist, what would it be and why?
Probably steam trains.
I wasn't expecting that.
I think that there's people have a nostalgia for
Yeah.
the old style trains, and I've only experienced it vicariously through others. But I think because I've never seen a steam train,
Yeah.
but I think that would be a blast from the past. I think,
Yeah.
harkening back to a bygone era.
I love that.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that brings us to the end of this week's episode of Akoni Tech Talks. Stephen, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining us.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.